Library collections presented by Morgan Tronstad. So, for our presentation today, we're going to begin with collection policy. Then, we're going to move on to self censorship, then article review, and finally, references. So, collection policy. There are many reasons to have a collection policy in place. However, there are three that I consider to be the most essential. Number one, collection development policies ensure that library purchases meet the needs of all users rather than just one or two. Oftentimes, as librarians, we receive a lot of backlash and pressure from outside sources to purchase resources that are not necessarily benefiting the community as a whole, but only benefit one or two members, which is not a productive use of our reduced funds. Number two, collection development policies ensure that collections are staying up to date with any advances in the fields or with changes in user needs. Without a policy in place, there may be holes or gaps in the collection that aren't discovered until it is needed. Our world is constantly advancing every day with new technologies, and so it's important that our collection development policies stay up to date. And when we say there may be holes or gaps, this doesn't necessarily mean that there's only one collection or that there's none. It means that there's significantly less. So this could be 6, this could be 20, but either way, it's not providing enough information for the person who's looking for that. Number 3, collection development policies are critical in planning how libraries' funds are going to be spent. With the reduction in funding for academic libraries, deciding how budgets are going to be spent take more time and care. Our funds are being constantly reduced, and so it's very important that we're spending this money wisely and that we're being very rational with the budget because otherwise it's wasting what little funds we have. Self-censorship. So the article I chose was Silence in the Stacks. Basically, my takeaway, or what the actual article was about, was that many school libraries in the United States are experiencing an unexpectedly large amount of censorship attempts. However, many libraries are participating in self censorship, such as 90 high schools in Texas who have removed 55 books from their collections. These titles have been quietly removed by librarians due to their topics, such as books about Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and LGBTQIA plus issues and experiences. So, not only are these libraries being attacked and censored by outside forces such as districts, government officials, and such, but also they're then being self censored on the inside by librarians. And this self censorship comes from a uncomfortableness with different topics, a worry about that it may cause issues or it may be controversial, and some of it's even unconscious biases. So, why is self censorship negative? Well, it violates the tenets of librarianship, which is what we learn in these classes in becoming a librarian. It ignores collection development policies and procedures, which is what we just discussed. By taking away and censoring these books, we are then creating gaps in our collection, which limits our readers. And it results in not only loss of meaningful discussion about books, but it limits diverse and inclusive perspectives that students need to process their changing worlds. Part of why we have libraries, and it's such an important piece of our libraries, is that they provide information to our students. And it's very important, as we learned in other classes and other discussions, that students are not limited these topics, that by limiting them, you're actually hurting them more than helping them. Because rather than learning about these topics and seeking information in a safe environment, such as libraries, where they can have discussions with teachers and classmates and librarians, they're then forced to learn and research these topics out in the world when they're older, and rather than forming their own opinion, they end up adopting opinions from other people or are exposed to harmful information. So it's very important that they have this place and this platform to learn this information, but also then discuss it and discuss how it's impacted them. So it's important to acknowledge your unconscious bias so that you don't subconsciously self censor. Because while we may think, oh, it's an unconscious bias, it doesn't really hurt anybody else. But when you're self censoring, for example, this librarian taking books out of their library, that not only affects her, but it affects all the students at that school who now do not have access to that book. And Texas has experienced more book bans than any other state in the United States. I felt like this was really important because while it's not surprising, it doesn't mean that it should continue on. And if we don't do something to stop it, it will continue. And it may actually spread to other states, as we've seen with the new bills that are being passed, as we've seen with the new control that officials have tried to put in place concerning public libraries, school libraries, and even classroom libraries. Article review. So, in my reading of children's collection development, good books or books kids like, I learned that there is no such thing as good books because all books have either an evocative narration, well developed themes, effective plot, plausible characterization, or an effective read aloud qualities. So, a bad book is actually one that just doesn't bring joy or interest to the reader. But this is completely preferential because while I may not love Dora books or Disney books as referred to in this article, there are students who love those books. So those are still considered good books, even if I don't feel like they're necessarily really rich literature. Um, a book is only bad if it just basically is bland. If it's bland to everybody, not just me. And how will this impact my collection development choices? Well, I'll choose books that are interesting to children rather than what meets my preferences. Because while that may not be the type of literature I like to read or that topic doesn't really interest me, it could interest the children. And oftentimes we see children who are interested in a variety of topics. One likes comic books, one likes fantasy, one likes mystery. And it's important that we meet all their needs, not just one. And finally, here are my references. Oops.